once you've moved past the integrations and the roadmap and all that, and you kind of understand what this could look like, I would want to really understand, okay, let's say we have everything set up properly. What do you have from a, AI or agentic standpoint that can take it to the next level, right? Because if all the integrations are working well and you're getting the return on investment from an efficiency standpoint, it would then be nice to know, okay, what if you have agents already, or if you're developing them, what can it automate even further beyond, simple approval workflows, right? Because a lot of these orchestration providers do already have some sort of, proprietary tech or some sort of agent that can really speed up processes beyond simply making sure everyone's in the loop earlier, beyond the typical intake value props. So I think what's important is not getting ahead of yourself, which you were kind of alluding to there. You don't want to start with that because if you don't have the integrations or the data in place, it's probably not going to go well. But it's still
Yeah.
a good thing to consider.
Thank you so much for joining another edition of The Never Ending Climb for a Stronger Supply Chain and Procurement. Today, we have the great pleasure of being joined by Nikhil Gaur. And Nikhil is an analyst with Spend Matters. He is now part of the Hackett Group, and his deep, deep experience with these ProcureTech solutions and is the leading expert on intake and orchestration. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nikhil.
Of course, Sean. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I really appreciate the kind words there. I definitely take a lot of pride in just going really deep with all the intake and orchestration providers and just really understanding on a functional level exactly what they can and cannot do and to what extent, especially because now it's becoming a much more competitive field, as you're well aware. So I'm enjoying my time, sort of combing through them and finding the differences.
And I think that's one of the coolest things about what I love about the way you and the team go through this is you go through it with the fine-tooth comb. And then you say, well, we didn't entirely see this part. So before we can give you any points for it, we really need to see that. So come back and show X, Y, Z. And then you do that on a participate to play, which creates a level playing field relative to other analysts where it's a pure pay to play.
Exactly. Yeah. That's where I say we differentiate the most from the other sort of maps that are out there, like you said, is participate to play is what we call it, because it is, I'm not going to lie, it is a decent amount of work from the provider side to fill out our RFI and show us all the demos, often multiple demos, etc. But I'd argue, and I would hope you agree, that it is rewarding to kind of see, you're starting to see the results of that. So,
the work that goes into preparing and answering all of the various questions, hundreds of questions, and then going through that exercise, I know was really, really helpful for our team as well. Because coming out of that, there's also an opportunity for us to make sure that we've updated a different perspective on, a different lens on the giant inventory of all the stuff that we do. And I think one of the other really interesting parts for us is when we take things that were not designed or built for intake and orchestration, and then they are in as part of that, there's times where you go, oh, that's so cool. It's like playing with Lego in a way, right? Is what's the most fun collection of what can you build with all these blocks? And in a way, that's the point of orchestration.
Yeah, exactly. And especially from a procurement point of view, this is a field that is very new and is arguably, I would say it's defined at this point, but what constitutes orchestration is something that there's not necessarily 100% clear answer to. So to your point, yes, I'm seeing, in a lot of cases, even from, solutions that are not solely for procurement, just seeing how they can draw from other areas of it to still address the key needs that a procurement user wants. It's been very interesting to see creative ways to solve problems. Is the easiest way to say it.
Yeah. And what I love about that is through this process and having gone so deep with so many providers over years, you've seen over 100 demos. What have you seen change over the last few years?
Yeah, that definitely is one of my favorite aspects, honestly, of my job is being able to see all the demos and seeing, like you said, the change over time, not just from different companies, but even seeing the same company's demo, 1 year and then seeing it again a couple years later. But the biggest changes I would say overall, especially for intake and orchestration, is really when it comes down to ease of use, that's always been the core of it. And I think one thing that all of these providers do really well is they create tools that the business user does not really need any training on whatsoever. It's just very intuitive, whether that's because it's a chatbot, focused tool, or if it's just very easy. You can tell where you need to click with modern responsive designs, etc. So the change over time has really been taking what is already an easy user experience and making it even more accessible for the user or giving them even more out of it, right? Where maybe 2 years ago, having a chatbot in your solution was like the new hot thing. Everyone had to have a chatbot. And, there's nothing,
Pros
there's
and
nothing
cons
wrong
to
with that.
those. Yeah.
Right. But we've kind of moved beyond that, right? I mean, not there's anything, like I said, nothing wrong with having it still, but now it's okay. Yes, you have a chatbot that you can ask questions to, but you could also, in many cases, use that same interface to kick off requests or even execute tasks within a request, just from a conversational interface or even just from, Teams, Slack, email, etc. via integration. So that's been the biggest change to me is kind of just seeing how it's already easy to use, like I said, but kind of building more on top of that to give users more insights with the same ease of use.
The other part that I'm imagining you're seeing is kind of the different, I'll call it philosophies of different providers, right? Some are like chat all the way, and some of them are, well, chat's helpful, but there's limits. And I think the demos, when you get past the first shiny object on the demo, and I know in the way that you run those, you're also saying, "Hey, can you make it can you click off the script just a little bit?" Which of course, if somebody's pure pre-sales and they're showing like the really highly polished demo and some of it's slideware, that like you cut right through that too, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. Because when I'm watching a demo, I have, like you alluded to earlier, a list of, usually over 100 things I'm looking for. Not all at once, of course, but, you know, I like getting sort of whoever's giving me the demo to go off script because it kind of shows how flexible and adaptable is the tool. And, one thing I tried to do is I try to be fair to the demoer. I'm not trying to test his or her flexibility in demo. I'm trying to test the tool. But yeah, absolutely going beyond sort of,
Oh my God, I didn't prep for that.
right, exactly. Like maybe they have a prepped sort of script for an intake request using a chatbot, but I want
Yeah,
to see what happens if, you're making the request on behalf of another person and you're doing it via maybe not a chatbot, but via the traditional like click-through interface, right? With a
yeah, or
form
through
that needs to
Teams.
be populated. Yeah, like
Yeah,
I want to see different ways of achieving the same task because not everybody likes to use a chatbot at the end of the day, so you need to have different options.
yeah, and I think we've seen that of, if you're playing 20 questions with a chatbot, it gets
Oh
real
yeah.
old real
Yeah.
quick. I mean, yeah, you might as well go play 52 pickup.
Right.
I think it's if you're thinking about the best and the leading solutions, what are you seeing in what good looks like today?
Yeah, so I think the key for that is getting beyond intake because nowadays pretty much everybody addresses that to some extent, and some better than others, to be fair. But really getting more into the orchestration is the differentiator there. And when I say orchestration, I'm talking about after the request has been made and actually executing that request. And often, pretty much all the time, it's being done using other systems that are integrated to the orchestration tool. It doesn't mean you have to leave the orchestration tool necessarily, but there's at least an integration there, and you're using different data sources maybe simultaneously to address one request. So the differentiation there is once the request is made, how do you integrate to other tools? How many can you integrate with, and to what extent, right? Because you can have two orchestration providers that give you an integration to, I don't know, DocuSign. I'm just throwing like, an e-signature, something like that.
Yeah,
But the way that they integrate it can be different, and the way that they leverage metadata, maybe from like an ERP, for example, the same ERP might be different. So in terms of what does, good look like, it's really just having the ability to adapt to very different types of customers who might have, different ERPs or, dozens of ERPs even, or they use, one tool for contract management, but another for sourcing, and those two don't really integrate well with each other, etc. It all
yeah,
comes down to the adaptability of the orchestration tool. And that's the area where I've seen a lot of development in the last year and a half, especially.
yeah. And I think that idea, the kind of the point, if you will, of a well done, well designed, well implemented, well architected orchestration tool is you can swap out a sourcing tool or you can swap out a contract tool, but you got to have the spine to go and make sure that they're staying on the rails and things aren't getting lost. And nobody ever gets to, station 42 and goes, wait, do I have to get off here or do I keep rolling on the red line? That kind of metro map for what happens next is so, so, so important. I'm curious. Obviously, you and I are talking in part because we have the privilege of being one of the solutions that stands out in its own way. If you're talking to a chief procurement officer or somebody in an IT team, and they are shopping for intake and orchestration today, what are some of the most important questions for them to be deeply, deeply asking, not just a surface 3 minute end of the demo thing?
Yeah, this is a really, really important question because, like I said, there are so many tools right now that address at least intake and to varying extents orchestration. And I would say that, there are maybe, if I had to give like a list of here are like the providers that I would recommend to the average practitioner for orchestration, there are like 10 or 12 that in many cases I would say, yeah, that makes sense. That's good for you. And you guys are one of them, of course, but it's not as simple as I would recommend this provider for this customer every time, right? Because the questions that I think the CPO should be asking is getting extremely granular on the integrations that are needed. And I think that beyond just asking, oh, do you integrate with my ERP or do you integrate with, this source to pay solution that we have? I believe you should just give, during the whole process, you should give a list of every single integration that you at least know you need and ask the provider in, very clear terms, have you integrated with this tool before for customers? If not, could you? And if you could, how would it address these specific business needs, right? Like how tight would the integration go depending on what you're looking for?
Yeah.
Because I feel like actually I don't feel this, I've been told by practitioners that one of the issues that people are having with orchestration providers after they, make the purchase, for the most part, it's pretty, I'd say compared to other procurement tech, it's really positive, return on investment, user adoption, etc. But sometimes there are issues with integrations in terms of, oh, I saw on the demo how easy it was to integrate with tools. So I thought that it would just take 5 minutes and be fine. But it turns out the mapping is not working with this one specific integration and it's messing up with our processes. And that kind of problem wouldn't come up if you asked the question pre-demo on the specifics of the integration. So to me, that's the single biggest one that should be asked because the other stuff like flexible intake and using AI or rules to route to the right people, that stuff I don't want to say it's become table stakes because some tools don't have it, but it's becoming very common to the point where it should almost be the expectation, especially if you're looking for a best of breed solution.
I would add one of the pieces of feedback that I get on the same lines is, yeah, so and so said they could integrate with SAP. And I said, right. Flat files aren't exactly the way to do it anymore. Or, dot, 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 other ways, as opposed to fundamentally our team's unfair advantage is where somebody runs that ECC or S4 system and we install inside it, which is like we're part of that NetWeaver stack as if it was built by that ERP provider. And I think that the point to really, and I hope people really take this home, is what are those things you need to integrate with, and how does that work? Because on one hand, mapping to an API, sure, it often works, but that next level of detail of what are the most important things to integrate with, and how is that going to be done? And if somebody starts talking about flat files, I think that's usually one of those times where you go, uh-oh, that is not real time. And I think the opportunity to double click on that, there's so many teams that are really good at asking security related questions. Where is your SOC certification? Where is your dot, dot, dot? Cool. But add the integration piece and thinking through what do you need to integrate with, because, Rapid Ratings, as an example, has a fantastic tool and the APIs are really simple. So not every tool has nice, clean APIs. And I think that's an absolute gotcha. What else would you add to that? I think there's a few questions that folks really need to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And the SAP example is a good one, but I think just sort of adding on, right? It's there are differences within integrations. Like I said, the same or two providers can give you the same integration, but it might not be as as deeply integrated, for lack of a better term. Like maybe one integration, you could read the metadata from the other tool and leverage it somehow. But can you write metadata and can you make different sorts of alterations beyond simply pulling the status of a request, right? That's something
Yeah,
that I've seen that a few providers do better than others is particularly the ability to take data from an integration and use it throughout the orchestration platform almost as if it's native data, like with that level of extensibility. So that's something that I think would be really helpful for a lot of organizations that have, maybe larger organizations that have more complex ERP or tech environments with lots of integrations necessary. That's the
Oh
kind of thing
yeah.
that could be a game changer for them. So it's kind of more just harping on the same question, but to me, integrations have become the single most important aspect of orchestration because it's where, other than the initial intake, is where the value comes from, essentially, right? And we can talk
Yeah.
about AI or agents, and that's, there's definitely value there too. But I think, I don't want to say it doesn't matter if you don't get the integrations right, but the value of
But
it
it
becomes a
kind of
lot,
doesn't.
right? It
Right?
becomes a lot
It's
less
interesting to
valuable.
chat with it, but you got to be able to transact, right? If you can
Yeah,
read something out of an ERP, but you can't write anything back, it's kind of hard to orchestrate, right? You're still left with a sneaker net to go get the transaction into whatever other system.
exactly. Right.
I love that. And I think the language that we use and the depth that we go, that dig deep to understand what really matters there is so, so, so important because it's easy to say, oh, it's easy to demo, easy to integrate. Look how quickly you can do this. And then we get into, great, what are the scenario? And I know that there's a theory coming out of certain parts of the tech ecosystem that, the integration's easy. But if we think back to patterns in history that are repeating to an extent, Oracle faced this a few decades ago and they bought a whole bunch of stuff and then they had to build that Oracle Fusion middleware, which some have argued that that was maybe an early precursor to some of the ideas of what orchestration could or would be today. But if you fast forward, there's now, another large blue ERP provider that had an ERP and then went on an acquisition spree and is now looking at various tools to go and help weave it all together. It's kind of a middleware fusion 2.0, but for that orchestration and the integration to work, it's got to be able to your point, read and write and push and pull transactions and then thread the needle through a series of different steps and downstream systems to really weave it together elegantly.
Exactly. And a good example of that, the business user, so meaning not the person who actually configured all this, but the regular business user experiences all this in real time or near real time, but doesn't even realize that it's happening. Like they don't
Yeah.
know necessarily that you're leaving the orchestration platform to get something done. They just know that the request they're making or the approval they're making is, happening successfully. So that's really the key is, can you not only read but write and alter, but also can you do that in real time or near it? Because sometimes it's, oh, we can do that on a 30-minute interval. And in some cases, that's fine. In some cases, you don't need it to be more than 30 minutes, but in other cases, you do. So just having that flexibility is really important.
I love it. I love it. This sense of a few other questions. And I was going to lean on events and the ability to handle events as things that are real time, because even 30 minutes is a lag that for some businesses is a little too long these days. If you're thinking about the next questions, past kind of integration and the depth that we really need to get into there, what else would you add for CPOs and IT leaders?
I think it's important to get a good sense, at least at a high level, of the provider's roadmap because, like I said, right now, a lot of the orchestration providers are similar in terms of the value prop and what a good example would look like if the implementation everything goes well and you're connected to all your systems. You have a good sense of how the solution will work, but how does the provider plan to grow and in what direction? Because that's where there's a lot of different answers right now from what I know about the market. Like a lot of it is maybe really leaning into agentic AI, or maybe just going super deep on the orchestration when it comes to integrations, or maybe moving beyond orchestration and going to more native capabilities for procurement or supply chain or other software. There are a lot of different answers, and I think there's not really a bad answer, but it's more so just alignment with your organizational goals. So beyond the integrations, I would say just getting a good sense of where the provider is going in the future would help because this is a really fast moving industry. Like every 6 months, it's completely different almost in terms of functionality that's out there. So that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm hearing echoes there of a conversation I had this morning with somebody who was asking kind of a similar question. And the thought that I hope to leave them with is when there are stats out there that say 95% of AI solutions have this kind of an outcome or that kind of an outcome. Some of those stats are pretty interesting. And I think the timing of that capability relative to technology readiness is another one of those things that really, really matters. So I've been encouraging folks to really deeply consider how far down what some out there call agents. And that's even a whole other, like we could make a whole episode about what's agent. What
Right.
is an agent? Because a chatbot is not an agent. I'd love to add that of how real and how technologically ready are we for those use cases. There's another episode of this show where we were talking with the team from ProSci about how they've got piles of data of what's working and what's not. And there's guidance in their work around things that they're seeing success with and use cases or flavors of use cases where technology is not quite ready for some of the things that people hallucinate or imagine. And I use the term hallucinate as full on dad joke, being
Right.
ready to go live with. Last question that you would encourage folks to really consider around INO.
Yeah, I mean, I think because I'm kind of ignoring the intake part because, like I said, it's kind of self-explanatory. When you see it, you just get it.
Yeah.
So I guess going more from the orchestration side of things, once you've moved past the integrations and the roadmap and all that, and you kind of understand what this could look like, I would want to really understand, okay, let's say we have everything set up properly. What do you have from a, AI or agentic standpoint that can take it to the next level, right? Because if all the integrations are working well and you're getting the return on investment from an efficiency standpoint, it would then be nice to know, okay, what if you have agents already or if you're developing them, what can it automate even further beyond, simple approval workflows, right? Because a lot of these orchestration providers do already have some sort of, proprietary tech or some sort of agent that can really speed up processes beyond simply making sure everyone's in the loop earlier, beyond the typical intake value props. So I think what's important is not getting ahead of yourself, which you were kind of alluding to there. You don't want to start with that because if you don't have the integrations or the data in place, it's probably not going to go well.
Yeah.
But it's still a good thing to consider, even in the semi near term, right? Because a lot of these providers, like I said, already have agents, and the ones that don't are for the most part are making them or working on them.
That's amazing. And I think the idea of those AI use cases being proven, right? And for large organizations asking the question, are there billions of dollars already going through this use case? Or is this a pilot that worked well 90% of the time? Because enterprise reliability has got to be, at least 2 or 3 sigma, not 90% right. And I think that 90% right is where a lot of folks are getting caught right now of really cool demo, and it might be right 9 times out of 10, maybe 19 out of 20, but we get into trouble when we hit that 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 time where all of a sudden the trust in the solution is shaken. And I think that's one of those pieces where the reliability has got to be there, and the reliability at scale, not just reliable of 5 times of a demo successfully or something like that. So I think that's another one of those things that I would add to the questions. Quite a few years ago, I had not heard of Spend Matters, but obviously we've fixed that. I am hoping that there are relatively few people out there. But if you haven't heard of Spend Matters, I tend to think of it as like the Gartner for procurement technology. What would you add to that? Like, why would somebody reach out to you, to the Spend Matters team? How do they get in touch with you? And what sort of things, what sort of research do you guys provide that people should be looking for?
Yeah, thank you. So, as you can probably tell from the conversation, we go extremely deep on procurement tech in particular. So,
Yeah.
Spend Matters, we have only about 20 to 25 people, but we're recently acquired by the Hackett Group. So now we have, more resources at our disposal, which has been very nice. So overall, yeah, we just go really deep on procurement and understanding the specifics of what all these tech providers can do. And then in turn, we can use that information to help practitioners understand if you're looking for a provider, which one would be the best for you. We do a lot of advisory around that. We also work in some cases, at least I do, with private equity. If they're trying to invest in one of these providers, we often do the diligence for them. So a lot of different arms there, but in general, we just know a lot about source to pay and adjacent technology, and are always really happy to nerd out about it with anybody. And you can get in touch on our website at spammatters.com, or any of us on LinkedIn, myself included, we would be happy to chat.
That's amazing. What I love about this, Nikhil, is that there's that opportunity to hear from the source of the guy that has gone so deep. You've seen at least 100 demos, probably way more than that. So I, again, really, really grateful for you showing up, doing what you do, sharing with the ecosystem your experience, wisdom, knowledge. And thanks for joining today.
Of course, yeah, it's been a pleasure.